Welcome back to the Auto Obsessive Garage. Chadwick with you again for another installment of Project Show Me the Sleeper. In this episode, we continue our 60K service. We're going to get that timing belt replaced and replace that water pump. We're then going to get it all buttoned up and get ready for the next step of the very involved 60K service. So let's get in the garage and get to work. We're also going to remove that tensioner at this time, 132,000 miles, original tensioner. Probably time for that to go. So let's go ahead and loosen this 14mm bolt. You're going to have to reuse this nut and washer, so don't lose those. There we go. And the tensioner and spring all come off in one unit. Now you will have to, I'm sure there's a way to set this back in the correct way, and we'll make sure we'll do that for sure, but as it is, this is how it came off, so we're going to put it in similar fashion. It doesn't wobble or a little bit of play, so safe thing to replace that. You don't want to run the risk of your timing belt going slack when you're driving around, so let's go ahead and replace it. With our timing belt and tensioner fully removed, I'm going to go ahead and clean up this area pretty well. The reason for doing that is when I pull the water pump out, I don't want any gunk falling in. So I want to vacuum around and scrub around and make the surfaces all look good. Of course, we'll do some scraping when we pull the water pump out, but this is just an extra precaution I do. So let's go ahead and clean it up. To be frank, for a timing belt area that's never been opened up, it is completely clean in there. I mean, a little grime from the age of everything, but no oil leaks. You know, obviously the water pump wasn't leaking. Pretty awesome. This car was put together well, apparently. So let's go ahead and take care of that, then we'll pull this water pump out. Oh yeah! 50 PSI of air. We'll get most dirt particles out of the area, so let's go ahead and hit this with some degreaser. What's great about doing these extra details on jobs like this is no one will see this until it's time to do the next 60,000 mile timing belt. They'll just pop this open and be like, oh my gosh. It is sure sparkly clean in there. Let's go ahead and take this water pump out of here. We got 4 12mm bolts to remove. Don't worry about these 10mm ones. That's for just separating the housing for the pump. Let's go ahead and take those off. Okay, to pull the water pump out of the Ford Taurus SHO, it's a little different than some. Most water pumps have this kind of neck coming off that usually you have to disconnect 2 bolts. On the Taurus, it's actually impossible to get to the rear bolt. You can see the bolt right here just fine, but you can't see the bolt on the other side of that neck. So what you actually do in this vehicle is follow this pipe down right to that clamp. So what we're gonna do is undo this and then pull the rubber hose off. You're gonna get some coolant, of course, and then we'll pull the whole water pump assembly out. Of course, there's still a gasket here, so we'll replace that gasket when we have the whole unit out. So let's go ahead and do that. I just wanted to show you that. It's a little bit different than some of the water pumps out there. With that hose disconnect, we're gonna go ahead and lift the unit off. I'm gonna pull it out and then up. And there we go. Before you get ready to install your new water pump, your new kit should have come with a gasket, which is for the neck that goes down here, an O-ring for the part of the water pump that attaches to the engine block here, and then this tube right here that you can see back there. That has an O-ring around it too. Just use a pick, go ahead and slide it off and slide the new one on there. Make sure you replace all of those. It's a shame to do all this work and then have one of them leak. So we're going to be using this water pipe on the new water pump. So we just got to remove these 2 Allen bolts. They are 5mm, and there's a gasket that goes in. Make sure you have that gasket. You definitely want that to be watertight. As you can see, the old gasket is basically fused onto this water pipe. So certainly go ahead, get a razor blade and slice that off, and then we're going to clean up this pipe, because why would we put a dirty part back on the car? Hey, that's pretty good. Let's take the rest off with a razor blade. Time to place this little gasket on the water pump and connect it to that neck. Okay, you're looking at this section here. You want to make sure this lines up perfectly. It really only goes one way. Perfect. All right, water pump assembly is nearly good to go back in. Here's the front of it, as you can see, looking pretty good. There is one O-ring that we need to install on the unit. Right down here, we need to install that. So you probably got 2 rings with your kit. Now the thinner one's gonna go here, and this thicker one is the one we're gonna put on the neck that's coming out from under the intake manifold. So important to distinguish those two. This sits flush against the engine, so you definitely want the smaller one in there. If you put something too wide, it won't, even when you torque the bolts down all the way, it won't seal. So let's go ahead and put this on here, should pop right in. Look at that, perfect. And then let's get that old O-ring off. Of course, you want to compare the size to the new one. Make sure you're dealing with the same thing before you slap on one. And as you can see, the new one looks a little smaller, and that's probably just due to this one stretching out over time. So let's go ahead and install this new one. Probably the most challenging thing about putting this water pump assembly back in is making sure that we get the water tube down into that rubber hose at the same time as this sliding on the back of the water pump. So we're not going to obviously tighten anything down until we get both of those connected. That's probably going to be our best strategy. Here goes nothing. Don't be afraid to reach back here and ensure that your rubber O-ring hasn't fallen off in this process. You will know as soon as you start your car. A good inspection mirror is what I'm going to use next to check back there to see if that pipe is fully seated and that the O-ring is still in there and didn't slide back on the pipe. Okay, we're going to use our inspection mirror to check to make sure that pipe did seat nicely against our water pump. Sometimes it could feel like that and one side's off, or that O-ring could have slid back, and we look good. Looks like it went right on, and I'm down in that rubber hose, which is perfect. So it looks like we got her on. Let's tighten our bolts. Definitely want to do a final inspection. You definitely want to fill it up with coolant and everything before you put your timing belt back on. You do not want to have to take the timing belt off again and again. So let's go ahead, bolt this water pump on, torque it to spec. We should be finished up. Okay guys, time to install our new tensioner. Now you're going to reuse the spring that you got off your other one. I cleaned mine up a little bit like I do for everything that comes off a car. Now you'll notice some interesting things on the new tensioner, just like the old one. You got this weird section here that kind of pokes out, and that's because this spring section is going to go on like so and hook around that. And you'll also notice this straight section, when you look on the back, and I really don't have a good angle for it, right above where this goes, there is kind of nub sticking out from the engine where this will catch, and that's what actually allows you to put tension on the spring when you're tightening and loosening to move the tensioner to let the timing belt go back on. So just keep that in mind when you put this in, and it looks like it's going to be a little pain in the butt to get to, but it shouldn't be that bad. 14 millimeter, and the nut and washer go right here. When you're finished tightening down your water pump, do not forget to tighten this band and pull it up on that pipe. You will find out when you go to fill your radiator if you didn't, so just remember to grab that one. Before we throw that nice new timing belt on, let's make sure our timing marks are still good. Check each cam. You're checking basically to see if this dot on the cam gear lines up with this on the backing plate. Perfect, perfect. And then you're coming down to the crank, and what you're gonna see down here is a little hole on the timing belt pulley. You wanna line it up with this mark right here, this little metal outcropping on the actual engine itself. So our timing is set perfectly. Now, that's really important when it comes time to put this new belt in, because you're gonna line up, there are already marks on the new belt, and you wanna have that all accurate as can be. Let's install our timing belt. Line up. Also, the words are not going to be facing towards you. They'll be oriented towards the engine. That's a little tip there. So let's go ahead and slide this belt on. I like to start up here with the cam gears myself. That's a heck of a good start. So we got the top done. Obviously, I'm not even around the tensioner or around the crank pulley yet, but we'll get there. But as you can see, this is how you want to do it. So everything facing towards the engine, you shouldn't be able to read it. It should be the opposite. And your lines on your timing belt should line up perfect. How about that? Makes life a lot easier. Now to give yourself the most wiggle room, I like to come half off each of the cam gears, half off the tensioner, and then try to get it around the crank in the right place too. Here we have the timing belt installed correctly. We still haven't messed with the tensioner yet to really tighten up all the slack, but we do have all our marks lined up, as we'll see. Now on the crank, on the crank pulley itself. This is very important, and I don't know if we're gonna be able to see this. Let me use my super zoom. Okay, excellent. So you can barely read that. I apologize if you can't. You can see the crank pulley mark, and you can see that is lined up where it's supposed to be, but also on the timing belt there were 2 lines. You can see 3 liter and 3.2 liter. Obviously, for your respective engine, line that mark up on the dot. So you can see my line is perfect with the 3 liter mark, which this is. It's a 3 liter SHO engine. So we are perfect on all 3 marks. Good stuff. Now we just need to tighten the tensioner down, get that set. I believe after we get everything back together, we do crank the engine a few times just to lock that in, but boy, look how pretty this looks, guys. Let's get this job finished up. If you guys thought I'd put this nasty timing belt cover assembly back in there as it is, you don't know me very well. So let's go ahead and scrub all this up nicely. Time to put our timing belt covers back on. Middle one goes on first, and also remember that this long bolt here, the lower left one on the middle timing belt cover, has to be put on after the lower timing belt cover because it threads through both. So just keep that in mind when you're doing all the bolts for the middle. We've got the timing belt covers all back on. Here's the upper and middle. Oh, step down below, you can see the lower down there on the crank. So, the next few things we need to really do are put all those tensioners for the accessory belts back on. We also need to put the harmonic balancer down there on that crankshaft. And then the big thing is getting that crank bolt back in without the whole assembly rotating. So we're gonna have to find a way to brace that so we can tighten it back on. All right, let's go ahead and start getting these things taken care of. All right guys, I'm trying to pivot the channel now, become more of a cooking show, as I've realized wrenching isn't that fun to watch. Okay, I'm messing with you. Basically, and this is with most pulleys, you want to heat them up to slide them back on. This thing will not slide right back on the crankshaft. There's been a few times where I can get harmonic balancers to get back on, but usually you gotta heat it up. So what we have here is the toaster oven. 2 things here, guys. A, you don't want to let your wife know that you're using the toaster oven to cook car parts. B, you do not want her to also know that you can cook. Not that those are real concerns, but let's go ahead. You want to basically get this thing nice and toasty, so stay on, bake. I like it around 400 degrees. You don't have to preheat, you can actually just go ahead and throw it right in there. Just make sure it doesn't kill your oven. Close enough, doesn't have to be pretty. You're probably gonna want to give it like 20 minutes to fully heat up, and then we'll pull it out, slide it right on the crank, and we should be good to go. Use oven mitts, guys. Don't try to do this with bare hands, of course, and don't try to do it with just mechanics gloves. Those aren't heat rated enough, so get some oven mitts ready, and you gotta be quick, so keep the toaster oven close to your crank, so you can just simply grab it, slide it right on. And slide that bad boy right on. And it should slide pretty much right against the timing belt cover almost. It's okay if it doesn't go all the way in. As long as the crank bolt can reach and thread, you can tighten this thing the rest of the way. So, what's the use of doing all that work if we put dirty parts back on, right? Let's clean them up. As you guys know by now, it's the little details that count. So here we go. Here's that tensioner bracket all cleaned up. Time to install our tensioning pulleys. Now there's a power steering one, and then there's an alternator side. We're gonna do the power steering one since it's the furthest one down. That's the one we didn't remove the bracket from down here. So here we go, we have our pulley. So let's go ahead and tighten that in first. Remember, we do want that to be slack, so when we put the belt on. Now it's time to do the alternator side bracket. Now getting this crank bolt on is no easy task, guys. So here's what I did. Here's my 1/2-inch torque wrench. I set it to 125 foot-pounds. That's a good recommended torque setting for this crank bolt. Since the car was jacked up, I jacked it up, got it off the jack stands, and lowered it on the passenger tire, jacked from the front of the car. Have the tire resting on the ground on the passenger side to give you that resistance you're gonna need. Now on the driver's side, you don't need to put the tire back down. For my engine hoist, I use the lever, which is solid steel, very heavy duty. Put it between the studs like so, and that way when you rotate, it'll hit the concrete floor in the garage and will basically lock that wheel just like the tire on the other side is locked. That way you can get the leverage you need to get this crank bolt on at 120 foot-pounds or more. So I did 125 just to be safe. We're all tightened up. Time to jack the car back up, get it leveled out, and continue on. Time to install this water pump pulley. This is exactly when organization really pays off. I put everything in baggies, mark them, and put their hardware in there too, so we're not playing the mystery bolt hunting game all over the garage. Keep it organized, guys.